Hi friends, in this video I will be showing you how to obtain the product of two matrices. So if a matrix is labeled A and B and we are to obtain the product of the two matrices in this order, that is A multiplied by B, how are we going to do it? First of all, you need to note that matrix multiplication is not commutative. In other words, if you have a matrix, two matrices labeled A and B, for instance, the product AB is not always the same as the product BA. That is what you need to note first. It is not commutative. Now, for us to obtain the product of two matrices, there is a criteria that the two given matrices have to meet. Now, the criteria is that if I have to obtain the product of this matrix arranged in this order, the number of columns of the first matrix A here have to be the same as the number of rows of the second matrix. Now, let us go further to see if these given matrices met these criteria. Now, you will recall that A is a square matrix of order 2, that is, that A is a 2 by 2 matrix and B is also a square matrix of order 2, which is to say that B is also a 2 by 2 matrix. In other words, A has 2 rows and 2 columns. B also has 2 rows and 2 columns. So since the number of columns here is the same as the number of rows here, it means that the product of these two matrices will result to a new matrix, maybe C. Now, how then do we go further to obtain this product? That is, if C should be the product of A and B, remember A is this matrix, A is this matrix 2, 3, 1, and 4, and then B is this matrix 5, 2, 6, and 1. How do we go further to perform this basic operation? It's very simple. Very, very simple. First, we are going to pick the rows in A and use it to multiply the columns in B. That is, we pick the rows in A, pick the columns in B, multiplies the corresponding entries from the rows and columns we have picked, and then add up their result. Now, let's say, for example, that the first entry in this matrix C is C11. In other words, here we are picking the first element, the first row in A, and we have picked the first column in B, and we want to multiply the first rows in A and then the first columns in B. But in the first row, there are 2 entries, 2 and 3. And in the first column, there are also 2 entries, 5 and 6. So the first entry here will be used to multiply the first entry here. Then the second entry here will be used to multiply the second entry here. And after the multiplication, we'll simply add their result. So if we go further, it means that the first entry here, 2, will be used to multiply the first entry here, which is 5. Then I will add the product of the second entry here, which is 3, and the second entry here, which is 6. Now, if we do this, we will then have 2 times 5, which is 10, plus 3 times 6, this will give us 18. And if we should add, then we are going to obtain 28. So that is to say that when I pick the first row and use it to multiply the first column, the result I obtained is 28. Now, I will go further to pick the first row in A and then the second column in B to see what the entries is going to actually give us. So here, the first entry in the first row is 2. This is 2. I will use it to multiply the first entry in the second column, which is also 2, plus, this is the second entry. I will use it to multiply the second entry here. I will then have 3 times 1, and this is exactly 2 times 2, that is 4, plus 3 times 1, which is also 3, and then the final result will give us 7. I will go further to obtain C21, Here, I have picked the second row and the first column, and this will exactly give us the second row is this and the first column is this. So the first entry in the second row is 1 times the first entry, which is 5, plus the second entry is 4 times the second entry, which is 6. And this is exactly 1 times 5 is 5, plus 4 times 6. This will give us 24. And this is now exactly 29. Then finally, I will have C22. That is the second entry will be used to multiply the second entry in the second column. And this will eventually give us 1, the first element in this first row, in the second row, times 2, which is the first element in the second entry, plus I will have 4 times 1. 4 is the second element in the second row, and 1 is the second element or entry in the second column. And this is now 1 times 2. This will give us 2, plus 4 times 1. This will give us 4. And if I do the addition, this is exactly 6. So we then have that this matrix C, these are the entries. So I will have C11, C12, C21, and finally C22. And this is exactly, our C11 is 28, our C12 is 7, our C21 is 29, and then our C22 is 6. So this is the product of A and B. Remember that we first of all check whether the two given matrices are conformal. That is, if the number of columns in A equals to the number of rows in B, and when they are conformal, we then pick the rows in matrix A and use it to multiply the columns in matrix B, the entries in the rows we picked, and then the columns we picked are multiplied accordingly, and then their product is added up to obtain the entries in C. Keep practicing and see you in the next lesson.